Hello, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martin Lovers. I'm the Chief Technical Officer of Supply Chain Media. You might also know me as the Editor-in-Chief of the Supply Chain Movement, the European Quarterly, and also a newsletter. Welcome to this live webinar. We have a great webinar. We talk about digital twins and basically how to use a digital twin to outsmart disruption by protecting and future-proofing your supply chain. And I have two experts with me, and they are from Koopa and from Ahlers. So you see me on the left, that's me. And in the middle, I have Matt Tichon, Vice President Industry Strategy of Koopa Software. Matt, hi.
Hi, good morning, afternoon.
And next, we have Miguel van Asch of Ahlers. Miguel, hi.
Hello, good afternoon.
And also good morning. I saw some people over there. So this is a live webinar. It will be recorded, and the PDF will be made available afterwards. There's opportunity to ask questions, and you can ask questions straight through the conversation we will have in the next 60 minutes. There also will be a Q&A at the end. If you ask questions, please use the Q&A functionality on the right-hand side of your screen. So you have a chat functionality, but we also have a Q&A functionality. The fun part of this Q&A functionality is if we have a lot of questions, you can vote on the questions, which ones should be asked. But then again, if this question is in line of the discussion we are having, I will ask this question right away. So you will keep this interaction. You can enlarge your screen by the small arrows on the upper right corner of your screen. Then you will have a larger view on the PowerPoint. And next, if you have still questions and you want to talk to Matt and Miguel afterwards, there's an opportunity to go to the lounge. So after 5 o'clock CET, we will go into the lounge and we'll be seating at table 1. So you have the opportunity to prolong the discussion with Matt and Miguel and myself afterwards. All right. Koopa, to introduce you, we have an IT subway map. And Koopa, you might also know Llamasoft from the future. Koopa has acquired Llamasoft, so that's on the map. But Matt, you can explain who Koopa is.
Yeah, sure. So Koopa is a primary business spend management solution, procure to pay process, doing that with community intelligence. And they bought Llamasoft, and really the Llamasoft acquisition is what we're talking today. And this is Koopa Supply Chain Design and Planning powered by Llamasoft. That acquisition brought Koopa these incredible capabilities around helping organizations decision across their supply chain. So if you look at Gartner, and I think people are very familiar with Gartner, their top 25 supply chains that they rate every year, 19 of those top 25 supply chains have standardized on Llamasoft's solutions for design and planning. And then you look at the value, right? This is all about return on investment, all about value. We surveyed our customer base 2 years ago. Roughly 700 of our customers came back. We totaled up those savings, and we found our customers using our solutions had identified over $16 billion in value. So $16 billion cutting out of their supply chain. So huge ROI, global in nature. Many of the world's leading global manufacturers, distribution companies, when they have that level of complexity, they outgrow spreadsheets, and they need a more efficient platform to help them with their decisionings. And you'll see 14 of the top 15 global logistics providers have standardized on our software as well. So they're in the business of helping their customers be more efficient, run more efficient networks. Ahlers is in that business as well. And you'll see we've become the global standard of those 3PL and 4PL companies to model and look at supply chains and how they can do things more efficiently and with resiliency in mind as well.
All right. Miguel, can you explain a bit more about Ahlers, just mentioned by Matt, but do it yourself?
Yeah, I think Matt just explained or introduced us as a 4PL. So indeed, we are a logistics company. We already exist for more than 100 years. So we've been in the market for quite some time. We're doing logistics operations with specific focus on certain niche markets. We have a trade facilitation and after sales service for more exotic markets, let's say. So Russia is for us a very big geographical region where we do quite a lot of logistics. We have project logistics where we basically transport anything that doesn't fit in a container across the globe. We're also active in forwarding and end-to-end supply chain solutions, and have some specialized solutions for transporting high-value cargo. Now, in the middle of the circle, you see there, you also see supply chain analytics and optimization, which is also one of our bigger services that we provide. That's also my role at Alers. So in my team, we have more than 10 certified people for Koopa supply chain software, more than 10 years of experience in a lot of projects, to customers both internally who are also making use of our operational services, but also externally, meaning that they are only a customer of ours because they're interested in our optimization and simulation capabilities. And that's where we would like to talk about today, together with Matt and Martin. So that's ours a little bit in a nutshell.
All right. So why this topic of a digital twin? And so we did a survey last year among 106 manufacturing and retail companies in Europe, and yes, S&OP is very important, but the red highlighted the software types are end-to-end supply chain visibility, prescriptive analytics is a major part of investments, and supply chain network design, the core of Lamasoft Koopa, I would say. And what we see here, and that's why I highlighted in red, that the companies with a more mature supply chain on a level 4 or 5, according to the Gartner maturity level, you see that there are significant differences in the areas they're going to invest in, especially supply chain network design and analytics and visibility. So, Matt, can you concur with this kind of findings?
Yeah, absolutely. I can concur with that. We're seeing more and more companies come to us looking for specifically supply chain network design, predictive analytics, like help us understand what's going to happen in the future with all this uncertainty. So how they can adopt some AI and ML powered techniques to really understand predictive analytics. And even if I look at the bottom, Martin, one thing you didn't look at was supply chain risk management. I
Yes.
think, that's a huge one there. Look at over 30% of your companies at the 4 or 5 level supply chains are saying we really need to understand risk management.
Yep.
And that's really what we've seen a lot of companies saying, hey, I want to use your platform to understand the inherent risks in my supply chain that I may not even be aware of.
Yep.
So yeah, it's really risk management, design, and analytics are the core of what we see. So absolutely concur.
And regarding risk management, also it's not when a volcano is going to burst or whatever, but also take out a factory somewhere. What does it mean for your network, for your supply chain, your value chain, at the supply side, and also what does it mean for your demand side of a lockdown in retail, that kind of stuff. That is also supply chain risk management. So also risk management is changing and evolving. Talking about that, the world is changing rapidly. So maybe Matt, you can say something about what you see in your market, how it has changed and is changing.
Yeah, and you see this. There's some macro shifts, right? And we saw that with globalization when companies went from multinational corporations to really global corporations at the turn of the millennium, and
Hmm.
China really became that manufacturing hub and powerhouse of the world, right? With globalization, we saw the rise of e-commerce, which is a disruption, which is really moving things from business to business to business to consumer. And boy, did we see that accelerate during the pandemic. Like e-commerce went viral, right?
Yep.
We saw cloud computing. Obviously giving us more capabilities. AI and ML is here to stay, and I think that's going to be continued to rolled out. And then now we're coming full circle. So the macro shift due to all this risk and pandemic is now globalization. So how can you have a global company but run it more regionally, bring things closer to the shore, kind of decouple some of your supply chains from a single place of global manufacturing, because it becomes risky. And I think we saw that with a tsunami, right? When you had a plant located in the path of destruction, and that node goes down, that capability goes down. It's nice to have some redundant capabilities. And then we see these external disruptors as well. So 9/11 was a disruptor. Hurricanes here in the U.S. we get those quite often in Florida and the Gulf Coast. We see other disruptions of volcanoes that continue to try to erupt. I already mentioned the tsunami and Brexit. I was just reading some articles the other day about truck driver shortages and how the Brexit has exacerbated or made that problem worse. And trade wars and COVID, and you see this stops at 2020, but I'm sure we could take this out to 2010, 2020, or 2030 2040 rather, and you just see a lot more events saying
Yep.
external disruptors. If anything, we know they're here to stay, right?
Mhm.
So I think COVID was really a wake up call to say we really need to take this seriously, and we need to start looking at our supply chains and designing them with resiliency and risk in at the forefront of our minds. Yeah.
And Miguel, what kind of disruption are you seeing within Ahlers and your world?
Yeah, I think it's something we see with customers as well, and I think Matt placed here a couple of examples, and mainly the large world examples, but it can also be a lot smaller. I'm thinking roadworks here in Antwerp, for example, or other things that are more local, strikes from factories, or a risk of a shutdown, like you mentioned, Martijn. That there is always external disruptors influencing the supply chain, and therefore, with modern technology, we see that a lot of companies are looking at how they can at least plan for it. And it doesn't have to be a complete redesign or new factories or new warehouses, but could also be just adding a little bit of buffer capacity and knowing where to do that. So it's something we see with customers as well, and something that is happening, and as Matt mentioned, is here to stay. And we need to be, or we need to use the technology we have today to solve those type of problems.
And you also see a ripple effect that disruptions are triggering next one. So lockdown is uh, giving shortages, and shortages is giving fuel shortages and fuel prices going up, and then you get inflation, and so these kind of ripple effect of disruption also more triggering other ones you might not have expected, and then you have to deal with it. And then we change in the world because we are leaving behind the pure cost efficiency world. So Matt, so what kind of world are we getting into?
Yeah, because my entire career, 25 years in supply chain, it's really been do more with less, reduce your inventories, increase your fill rates at the same time, and we've deployed optimization technology, across production and transportation. The supply chain practitioners did a great job of making really efficient, really lean, just in time supply chains. The challenge is that all worked well, and I mentioned the global manufacturing centers, and we've enjoyed an amazing market basket of goods and products almost no matter what country you live in, from a global basket of assortment that's fresh, and the costs are amazing, and we did that through incredible efficiencies. But now what the pandemic has done, it's really shown our vulnerabilities of those supply chains because they were so lean, efficient, and just in time. That's great when everything's predictable, but when the unpredictable hits, those weaknesses of the supply chain came to the surface very, very quickly. And it's interesting, Martin, you didn't even have to have like a manufacturing plant go down. A big disruption can be a channel shift, right?
Yeah.
Of consumers wanting things at the home because there's a lockdown, and manufacturing has to understand, well, that's a different pack size, that's a different manufacturing line. So there's a lot of implications just in a channel shift. So executives are looking at this saying, okay, I still need a cost efficient supply chain, but now I need to temper that with resiliency. And how do I do a bimodal strategy that says, I still want to be cost efficient, I still want to be competitive, but now I need to, that's not going to be in all times the preemptive decision that I make, because I also need to balance that with resiliency. So what does it cost me to have a second point of import? What does it cost me to have a second supplier? And is that cost justifiable based on the resiliency it brings to my supply chain? So those are the types of, and that's just a quick example, those are the types of trade-offs now we're seeing companies make, and that is a true shift.
Mhm.
They're really looking at this. It's not lip service. They are putting their money where their mouths are and saying, we're investing, and Miguel talked about it, surgically looking at where do I put that buffer stock. They're investing in inventory, they're investing in buffer stocks, they're investing in putting material closer to their customers and dual sources of supply. So it's not lip service. Companies are actually making these changes because they need to continue to serve their customer base, because one of the biggest challenges is switching behavior, right?
Yeah.
And you don't want customers to switch from loyal brands. So those are the types of things that we're seeing.
And companies have to, look at the picture of a container terminal, and it's, it's almost unbelievable that 60 to 70 container ships are, waiting to be in Long Beach to be unloaded, and that's unheard of, especially when you have the festivity season coming up. So companies have to do, but there are limits to the design of the supply chain until now, I think, or not, Matt?
Yeah, I think there's been limits to the supply chain and limits to supply chain design. You mentioned the containers in Long Beach. Yeah, these boats are backing up. The ports are full. The president says of the United States says, "Don't worry, we're gonna make sure the unions are working 24/7 at the port." But the challenge is we have such a critical shortage of truck drivers now.
Yeah.
And a lot of times these container ships were coming to Long Beach, then going up the coast of California and doing a second drop in the Oakland area. And now they're saying we're not doing a second drop. So now you have all these containers showing up at one port when they used to split between two ports. And now you've got to truck this stuff across the state of California, which is a 10-hour drive, 6 to 10 hours depending. So it's really come down to a trucking shortage and a lack of truck drivers. It's a critical bottleneck. So we see legislation right now pending where they want in the United States you can't drive a truck between states unless you're 21 years or older. And now there's pending legislation saying, hey, we want 18 to 21-year-olds to be licensed to drive, semis across state lines to try to get like a younger applicant pool and incent and get more truck drivers. And that's really become a critical bottleneck in this company. And who would ever thought that in this country? And I'm sure we're not alone. Whoever would have thought that 4 years ago, right? That would have been a critical issue.
So how things are changing, looking at this slide.
Yeah. So exactly, things are changing rapidly. So when we look at episodic supply chain design, we're saying, look, it's not a one and done. It's not design your supply chain once every 5 years. We're saying there's so much changing in our supply side and demand side and channel shifts. You really need to regularly look at your supply chain design and make sure your supply chain is relevant to your market and relevant to your internal and external stakeholders. And decisions you made a year ago may have been exactly the right decisions to make, but a year later, they're not so valid anymore. So, and we'll talk about that as we get into that, how we help companies with that. But, you look at structural designs, right? Where should I open new facilities? Should I upgrade production lines? An easy one is my capacity going to be available? And do I have peak seasonal command that I can offload to a toll manufacturer or an external manufacturer or an external warehousing company if I overflow my space? And what season of the year do I have to do that? And which products would I put there? And then you get into flow path decisions, and that is just looking at how you source. Look at this like in the terms of sourcing rules. So any node in your end-to-end supply chain, where does it receive product from? And just looking at those flow path decisions, we had a large distributor here look at this and say they were able to they were in the restaurant industry, supplying food to thousands of restaurants, just by doing analysis of which restaurants were served by each distribution center and reshuffling that deck. They're able to free up like 19% of their capacity to enable more growth in the brand. So it's not you don't have to look at huge structural changes in your supply chain. It literally may just be the rules you use and the flow paths to direct material around your supply chain, and reevaluating that on a regular basis can unlock some huge value. And then obviously you get into policy planning. Wouldn't it be great to be able to test out some policy of what does a 97% service level mean to us? And do we have the physical ability to store the inventory that requires, and which product should that be done on? And, testing these things out. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So we're seeing this come into much more of a episodic supply chain design. And that's validated as customers come to us and they say, look, we're looking for a one-time project. And then we start talking to them, educating them, and very quickly like, yes, we want to bring this capability in-house, and we really understand we need to be doing this on a regular basis because things are changing so fast, right? And we want this capability in-house.
So maybe 10 years ago, companies are using supply chain network design software to calculate where should I put my factory, where should I put my warehouse, etc. But now it's more on a continuous basis, and now you come up also with a phrase, continuous design.
Mm-hmm.
So can you explain what it is, continuous design?
Yeah, and that's just it. So continuous design is getting into evaluating your supply chain to make sure it's relevant. And I use that term relevancy. And as I used to run global supply chains, supply chain people are some of the greatest firefighters in the world, right? And you peer over a planner's shoulder, and they're trying to figure out what to expedite, we call it a hot shot, like team drive a truck. We need to get this across, a landmass very quickly. So put 2 drivers on it, one sleep, one stays awake, which costs a lot more money, but you keep production running. And all that firefighting is usually a result of a supply chain that's operating, that wasn't designed for the environment that is currently operating in. So when we talk about continuous design, we're saying we want to make sure that your decisions are relevant, right? So as you build this model, it's a living, breathing model, and you can continue to test efficiency, but it's really looking at the redundancies, and using the analytics we talked about at the beginning, right? Predictive analytics and descriptive analytics, to bring out to the surface where those opportunities are. And when you look at your supply chain end to end, and you look at it in the context of design, right? You can have different decisions you make, some hard constraints, some soft constraints, and it's this great ability to test the robustness of your supply chain and see what comes to the surface. I know Miguel has quite a background in data and in analytics. Miguel, do you have a point you want to make on this and kind of where you're seeing continuous design happen?
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. The 2 things that I would highlight here on the slide is the first thing is basically interdisciplinary that you have there, and because a lot of things that you decide when you are designing your supply chain are so much involving other departments in the business. So we look at finance, but also sales is typically someone who has to be included, and they come back with so much feedback that that emergent practice that you talk about is becoming a lot more valuable, because things have to be adapted, certain parameters need to be aligned, certain things need to be changed. So having a breathing model, as you call it, is so much more valuable, because you can gain a lot more insights from more stakeholders. Other thing I wanted to mention there is the AI and machine learning capability, because it allows you to optimize so much more in real time, and it allows you to add a lot more complexity to your data set, because I'm going to talk about it in an example later on, but including traffic data, including other external data sources in your digital twin model, and having the capability of artificial intelligence and machine learning allows you to guide your decisions and guide them much quicker than what you would have in looking for that mathematical optimization optimum. But having more of an AI and machine learning approach allows you to optimize within a much shorter period of time. So that I think is an emergent practice, especially in modeling and in doing projects for customers, that we see as a huge benefit.
And I think also that the continuous design is also a bridge to your execution. In the old days, it was supply chain network design, and it stopped there. But now, with the computational power, you can respond on that. You can act on this new data. So how do you see the execution part in all this? So how is it new in this world, Matt?
I mean, the execution is becoming much more, what's the word I want to use here? Smooth, right? Because as you're using your ERP system, and ERP systems are designed just for that, to execute, right? They're not planning, they're execution engines. And when you have your supply chain policies correct, when you have your capacities correct, you're seeing the execution be much more automated, much more fluid, without all that manual interaction. And because it really comes back to the data-driven decisions. If I just kind of recap my brain the last 2 or 3 minutes of conversation, it's really the power to make all these data-driven decisions where, maybe it was 20% data and 80% gut feel and experience in the past. And now with this, continuous design, I think it's flipped. It's more like 80% data and we get a lot of data to make this decision, a little bit of gut feel, and that experience. So that really transfers into an execution arm that is well synchronized between the functions and between the nodes of the supply chain, that's accomplishing all those goals. And Miguel talked about that interdisciplinary approach, and that's completely accurate. And that's when I talk about relevancy to internal and external stakeholders. Those are the stakeholders I'm talking about: the CFO, your VP of sales, the product engineering team. Those are all stakeholders of the supply chain design, right? And when that is correct, execution becomes much more efficient and much more easy, which obviously relates in increased customer satisfaction. And that's really what we're going for, is please the customer, right? Dazzle your customer and they'll come back.
Miguel, I can imagine that having a location in Antwerp, and there's a lot of road work going on over there. That your system has to learn from the mistakes or the traffic jams all over, and have to respond in an execution mode differently, and learn from that, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it's true. And it comes back to my point I made on artificial intelligence and machine learning. I mean, and it's also a little bit on risk management, and the simulation and probabilistic approach that Matt has put there on the slide also relates to that. But it's kind of, you can never predict the unforeseen. So it's not true when you say we're going to know it up front, but you can prepare for it. And if you have the ability to learn from data from the past, and have the ability to run several simulations on where you can go, then I think you're much better prepared, and that allows you to come with a good plan whenever certain things happen. So in that sense, I would say yes, AI plays a role, and learning from the past plays a role, but it's also in discovering alternative scenarios that you find the most suitable one for your organization.
So Matt, maybe let's talk about digital twins now, because there's some unclarity in the market, I think, about this phrase. So what's your explanation of a digital twin?
Yeah. So a digital twin, I mean, at its core, is a virtual representation of a physical, let's call it a physical asset or a physical thing. So we'll start there, and then we'll take it to the supply chain. And when you think about this, digital twins are not new. Well, they're new according to Gartner, and they're new in the hype cycle. Digital twins have been used for decades, and I think the most pertinent example where people can really understand is the pilot, right? The pilot's been using the simulation technology for decades, and it's proven, right? It's not a is this really going to work? Like, absolutely, this is standard issue. Like, if you look at this example, one of our fighter jets, one of our recent ones, almost close to $70 million for one of these fighter jets, and we don't let a jet pilot certify on that and just take it to the sky and make a mistake, and he uses the parachute and the plane crashes. It's not a good way to start out. So we put our pilots through a ton of time in simulators where they can test different maneuvers. They can test the airframe. They can practice takeoffs. They can practice landings. They can practice emergency maneuvers, and they can see how the airplane responds. And if they push things too far, oh well, they hit the reset button and try again. And they get to the point where they perfect this. Then when they actually take to that aircraft and go to the sky, it's almost second nature. That learning curve is already done in a very safe, controlled environment. And digital twin is very similar. And we'll talk about the supply chain digital twin in the next slide, but it's really getting to, I want to go test out policies, test out design changes in a virtual world, so I can understand really how they're going to operate and act before I do it in the physical world. So that's a huge part of risk mitigation in the supply chain, is being able to test these things out and look at your margin impacts, look at your cost to serve impacts, look at your fill rate impacts, look at are you honoring certain supplier volume commitments as you make changes in your supply chain. All those decisions it can be evaluated with data, and then you can say, okay, here's what we're going to do to this part of our supply chain, because we've tested this out and we know it's the best option. So that's really a game changer for global supply chains. And to your point, it's really having the compute power and the scale and the solvers and easy technology where a citizen data scientist can do this themselves, and you don't need a PhD in data science to be able to do this now. And that's really the game changer. We're democratizing this and making these decision algorithms easily available across the community and across stakeholders in a company, so they can do these simulations. And that's really to us what a digital supply chain twin is all about. It's all that simulation power.
So if you look at this picture of this simulation of the pilot, this pilot doesn't only see what's close ahead, but also he can watch on his radar what's happening way out, if there's a missile coming in or whatever. So there could also be a more longer term perspective. So simulation is also advancing. And maybe you can explain how to relate it to the Koopa digital twin.
Yeah. So we go from digital twin, and then we take it to digital supply chain twin. And for us, this is, I want to be clear here. This is not a control tower. This is not something where you're looking at where is my freight right now on the ocean, where is that container. And there are tools that do that, where you want to look at your supply chain in real time right now. This is about getting above an ERP system that's really not designed to do a lot of what if scenarios, right? So the digital twin of the supply chain gives you the freedom to make some changes. So we build a model of your global supply chain, or it could be your global supply chain, and we extract that data from your ERP, your systems today. So your customer data, your manufacturing data, your sales history, a lot of that pertinent information, we find the vast majority is available in your transaction ERP system. So we extract that data and we build a model of your capacities, your supply lines, your supplier base. And then once we have that digital twin, then we can start testing out. To your point, we can take down a node in the supply chain, a supplier. We can close a port and say, what are the impacts? And we can let AI, go through. I'll just make it real easy. When I think about AI in this context, it's just really complex math and solvers that are looking to give you a better way to do things. So as you close down a node in the digital supply chain, then the solvers get to work and say, here's what the implications of that are. So this digital supply chain twin, again, is a level of abstraction. It's strategic decisioning. And to your point, it goes out for time frames. So this is unbound by time. So who's ever using it can say, I want this in daily buckets and weekly buckets. Maybe I want to do this monthly or quarterly. And that telescoping time frame can be a year out, it can be 3 years out, it can be 6 years out, or it can be next month. So you really build the digital supply chain twin at the level of abstraction that's important for the problem you're trying to solve. So you don't go into this and say, I'm going to build this end-to-end digital supply chain twin of my entire supply chain with every single SKU and every single capacity. You'd be overwhelmed. So the first part of this process is say, what is that decision you're struggling with? What is that supply chain KPI, that key performance indicator that you need to impact? And then you need to say, okay, given that, let's source the appropriate data to help us make that decision, right? And as companies' maturity levels grow, then they can start expanding that data model to enable them to make more and more decisions, and they don't lose that work. You're not starting over, from scratch. So going back to the fighter pilot, maybe they had in this is a hypothetical situation, you had that cockpit, and then once they got familiar with it, they said, oh, let's add forward-looking radar to this simulation and increase our capabilities. Similar with this digital supply chain twin, you start with a base, and then you start increasing your capabilities based on what the needs of the organization are.
So it resembles to me, as a playing chess with the help of a computer, and calculating forward and making a lot of simulation, and that's the AI part. And what is most likely move you have to make, considering what your opponent is doing, that kind of stuff. So it's like playing a chess, and your computer is helping out with all kind of scenarios and making most likely scenario, and that's one you might choose.
It's a great analogy. That's a fantastic analogy. Think of it like a chess game. Yeah, brilliant.
And Miguel, you are using the Koopa Lamasoft application a lot for your customers, but how do you do it? Do you have one model, or how do you use it?
Yeah, it depends. And it's like Matt mentioned, A lot of the times you build along the way, because not all of our customers, but not all companies in general, are they have different maturity levels in terms of data management. They have different maturity levels in terms of the use of technology or integrated solutions. So you can start pretty small, but the real value is in it. It makes your supply chain so much more visible within your organization, because so many people can have a look at this digital twin and say like, okay, but I'm a sales guy, and if I promise that I'm going to deliver in 24 hours, this is the consequence. So the digital twin makes it a real proof, or at least it makes it very visible. And it's like Matt mentioned, you can build along the way. We have customers who are in a very far maturity level where we can really leverage external data sources, leverage other technologies as well, and really simulate very complex stuff. But there are others who are really looking into that visibility and just understanding what the most ideal flow paths are. So it really depends on from customer to customer, but the technology allows that to start small and then build up as you go together with the customer.
So Matt, maybe you can explain how you approach it with your customers, but because there's a world opening up of possibilities. How do you approach this?
Yeah, we approach it by a couple ways. One is their business drivers, right, and the other is how we apply technologies to their business drivers. So again, we're looking at conversations with what are your burning platforms, what is that decision that you're really struggling with, where you need some analytics, and a digital twin would help you tremendously. And over the last 18 years, we've taken an incredible amount of feedback from our customers and invested over 25% of our top line back into R&D. The vast majority of that research and development is based directly on customer inputs. When you're working with the largest companies in the world, they've got a lot of ideas, great ideas to make our software better. So it's really that almost 2 decades of continuous improvement that we've been doing on our solutions that have brought us to what we have today is supply chain design and planning powered by LlamaSoft. And when you look at we'll start with this decision data model. So again, looking at your questions you want to answer, we help our customers guide to here's the data elements that you need. So we'll build a decision data model, just think of as a canonical database that then our models are based on top of. So we first have to source the data, validate that data. And then we apply the right AI and algorithms to it. So if you have a transportation problem you're trying to solve, that's going to need a different algorithm than if you're doing some long-term demand modeling, trying to understand how, external causals of macroeconomic drivers are going to shift your demand patterns, 3 years out. And then we give people, personalized experiences. So that's where that citizen data scientists can use our app studio to build applications in the language of the people that are going to consume it. So when you have this, let's say, end-to-end digital twin, but you have a sourcing department that wants to understand who do I award business to in what seasons of the year, and I want to award that business to my suppliers based on cost to serve implications all the way down to my end customers. Those buyers don't have to understand this whole digital supply chain twin. We can very quickly build them a personalized app, clicking and dragging our way to it in a matter of days, and give them a software as a service application where they can put in 2 or 3 variables important to them. The algorithm solve and come back and says, here's who you award the business to based on cost to serve across your entire supply chain. But the buyer doesn't have to understand all that complexity. They can just see a very skinny screen. We can expose part of the model. They change those key inputs, but it's using the entire digital twin to look at the upstream and downstream implications of those changes and evaluate it. So it's just become really effective at democratizing, because before you'd have to get in the line, right? Like who's our center of excellence or who's our modeling person, and get in the queue, maybe take them to lunch and bribe them a little bit to get higher in their in their queue of when they can deliver you that analysis. But now we can just this is on demand so these analytic departments can provide this capability and to the users and say, sure, just do this as you will. So we look at that App Studio, and that the App Studio is based on our supply chain modeler. So when Miguel says it depends, it does, and that's the great thing. This is a tool set. Think of it as a box of Legos. And if I give a box of Legos to a child, 3 children will make 3 different completely things out of the same box of Legos. So we give people the building blocks to really tailor the supply chain model to address the question they want to address. And again, exposing the right components of that to those different interdisciplinary users across that supply chain ecosystem with the App Studio. And that's really the magic, is making this available quickly to your user base.
And good to mention this the App Studio. And Miguel is a key user of your application. So next we have a few examples of how Alice is using the digital twin application of Koopa Lamasoft. Miguel, you can explain maybe the first example of how you have applied this digital twin at Alice, and an OEM supplier.
Yeah, sure. I brought 2 case studies on risk management and contingency planning, just to make it a little bit more tangible. But basically, what we see is, for example, in this case, this is a case we did for an OEM supplier. I put it there. So they produce cooling liquids for cars and machine engines. Their biggest customers are all the big car manufacturers in the world, for which they provide the cooling liquid. But you can imagine, if you're servicing these type of customers, that whenever there's a disruption in your service, or whenever there's a volume not getting there in time, you're risking huge penalties. And that's the exact case we had with our customer. The reason why I took these business cases, because they're not the everyday contingency planning models that you see. Because, for example, here you see COVID-19 disruption, of course, but the main COVID-19 disruption that they struggled with was how the COVID-19 created border waiting times all over Europe. So these border waiting times made it that their truck drivers were actually stuck at the borders waiting, leading to huge delays in arrival times at their factory. And their factory is located in Antwerp. They have a just-in-time factory, like what is typically the case in the automotive business. So goods need to arrive just in time to not have too many buffer and inventory, because they want to go as lean as possible. But whenever something goes wrong, it can lead to trouble. And there they had the real business issue that, if trucks are going to come in a lot more late, how do we cope with this? And we don't want to cope with this in our full network, but we want to cope with this in our one factory. And there we used the Koopa supply chain software in simulating all of these delayed arrival times, to really look at the impact within the factory. We modeled all the different workstations through which product flows in the factory. We had a look at, where will delays occur when certain raw materials are not getting there in time? What will happen to service level towards end customers, etc. And basically, the solution we came up with was a very easy application where the supply chain team could simulate a lot of late truck arrivals. And when they were simulating, they could understand the immediate impact on key factory cost drivers. Not just cost drivers, but also service performance indicators towards the end customers. And by doing that, they could easily adapt their action plan to add some buffer capacity. I'm thinking, for example, procurement saying, we're going to order a little bit more so that we keep a little bit of buffer of our key raw material, just to make sure that everything keeps running as it is. Or we're going to add, and that's one of the examples that they eventually also implemented, we're going to add an extra unloading station whenever late trucks arrive, that we don't lose our full product, or at least truck flow in the factory. So this is not about building extra warehouses or changing flows. This is more about really thinking within the factory, on how this they could solve and buffer against certain uncertainty. So we had quite some impressive results. A turnaround time that decreased, a lot more. Or at least a manageable on-time customer delivery, and that in times of crisis. And of course, the avoidance of the penalties I talked about. So a really powerful tool. And I think Matt talked about business users using apps. Well, that was exactly what happened, because the supply chain team had an easy application, and there was simulation and Koopa supply chain design software running in the background. So that was the one I wanted to talk about here. You can go to the next slide, Martin, because I've also added one that is more of a local approach. Local in the sense that this is really a Belgian case study in the construction industry. So for the Belgian market leader in bricks production, we did a project because in the Belgian building materials industry, there's a strong transition due to customer behavior. You probably are aware of the mobility problems that we have around our two biggest cities, Antwerp and Brussels. So there we have a lot of reduced mobility. And therefore, there's a need of, or at least a new way of thinking on how to distribute these bricks across the country. And there again, the applications that we developed were really allowed the supply chain team again to quite quickly understand, and you talked about it, Martijn, already. What if congestions come up? How can we learn from past congestion? What does that do to the arrival time of trucks, or at least the duration of trucks? So that's all data that we could reuse and simulate into our model, and it helped to understand the impact, firstly, but also to look at alternatives on how they could get their goods to Antwerp without being in traffic for such a long time. So that's exactly what we've done. They switched quite a lot of their volume and put it on intermodal connections, so using barge transportation, going from Ghent to Antwerp rather than via road. And then also they had a huge decrease in cost to serve, and this by all testing, simulating different scenarios, and understanding the impact of congestion on their network. These two business cases from an Ahlers perspective, just to show you that it doesn't always have to be, okay, I need to create a new warehouse. Of course, the business cases are huge there as well, and we can definitely also have a look at that with the software, but it can also go a little further and really simulate congestion, border waiting times, all that type of stuff. It allows us to really use that digital twin and put it to work and make decisions that are not really long-term with a range of 5 years, but can also have an immediate effect in that sense as well.
And I just a quick comment. I love this, that you're able to decrease CO2 by 25% and also decrease the cost to serve by 10%. Everybody wins, right?
Yeah.
It's awesome. So even being able to look at a sustainability officer and say, hey, as we make these supply chain decisions, here's how we're cutting our carbon footprint. Here's how we're getting closer to net neutral. And we're also reducing our costs and increasing resiliency. That is the power right there. I love that Ahlers is looking at that.
Yeah,
really
exactly, Matt. And the CO2 will become an even more important KPI as we move on, because I read more and more articles about carbon taxes, things that are where it will start making an impact. So it's also very important to incorporate that in your digital models and make sure that you can optimize for that as well.
Matt, you have also two or three examples. Maybe you can go through it briefly.
Yeah, this first one is great. So a medical device company, we really think about, surgeries and manufacturing like hips and joints and replacements. You remember when COVID lockdowns happened, No one was getting knee replacements. No one was getting replacements in their hips. So a lot of the elective surgeries just came to a halt. But they, continued to produce because we didn't know how long this pandemic was going to last. So they looked at this and said, we need to slow down inventory. And because the margins were so high, when they're manufacturing here in North America, they were shipping everything overseas via air freight. So then they said, well, maybe we can look at slowing our inventory down because we're running out of warehousing here. Let's, instead of flying everything to markets overseas, let's put them in container ships, which basically gives us floating warehouses and allows us to increase our storage capacity because there's not the urgency to get this to market because it's shut down temporarily. So they used this digital twin to look at how do we ramp down production for goods on the production side. How do we ramp up production for our COVID specific products that were COVID essentials, and then really quantifying that move to ocean freight and looking at a 35% improvement in the value and the knowledge of cost to serve. So reducing cost to serve, using, it's brilliant. Let's use container ships as a floating warehouse to slow down our inventory, and testing that out with the capacities, the contracted rates they can get in the marketplace, and looking at the end-to-end implications of that. And then again, when it comes into episodic design, looking at their drivers and saying, okay, surgeries are opening up and now we need to shift again. And that's a very relevant example of how doing this analysis regularly to incorporate things opening up, makes a difference, because then you need to understand, when do I go back to air freight, right? So that's a quick one in, cost to serve. And this was something we brought up, quickly. We had a global CPG company looking at really struggling with SAP to understand what I would, briefly say is more of a master planning exercise, and really struggling with, where to manufacture and how to manufacture. And they came to us and said, look, we're struggling with SAP. It's not designed for this. We've got some spreadsheets. We're really struggling with our spreadsheets. Can you help us out with this? And we said, absolutely. So we gave the planners visibility to multiple sites' production capabilities. We looked out 24 months, so I talked about that before, is we designed the model of that telescoping time frame that's important to the customer. And this went out 24 months, and we got pretty detailed on how we modeled out those production capacities, because every plant was not similar. Different products could run on different lines. So you have to build the model out with that, level of granularity. And they've just had a significant improvement with their costs on, and their resiliency too, is really spreading that manufacturing base out as they had changes in the market, and be able to do that extremely quickly. And then pushing that back into their SAP system. So MRP would then honor that when it went to, raise, procurement orders, or in this case, a production order, putting it on the right plant that had the capacity to best serve the market. So that was more of a global capacity planning, and we operationalized that for the planners. And again, if you look at this, this had over 1,000 SKUs. And I think I just got a case study mixed up, so I apologize there. We're looking at a retailer. I think I was talking about the next one.
I was clicking too quickly. Sorry. but for time's sake, we maybe briefly about this retailer, and then we can to the final part, because we had some questions.
Sure.
Online.
So this is a nice one, because with retail, this is a brick and mortar retailer that, when COVID hit, retail was closed down. And they're like, we want to understand what to do with our incoming inventory, because we can't really stop our inbounds because supply chain is long. We need to figure out what decisions to make. Do we liquidate this inventory through liquidators? Do we work with marketing and promotions to promote it on our website to try to drive demand for these products? Or do we put them in, an e-commerce channel, and what do we do with it, with his inventory? And they're able to stand up an app from scratch, again, build that decision data model, stand up this app literally in a matter of a couple of weeks. And this became their lifeblood of, what do we do from our seasonal inventory that's coming in? Is it too late for the store set? Do we liquidate? Which SKUs do we liquidate? Which ones do we promote? And it became this cockpit that said, when you have inbound inventory, here's the best decision to do with that. And I think we built over 25 rules in this, custom rules engine for them that would look at their priorities and base this on, margin and fill rates and customer satisfaction. So again, we talk about digital supply chain twins and some great examples of end to end, but it can be a very granular, more of a tactical, operational planning decision space that helps a retailer with inbound inventory. What do we do with it, right?
Maybe that's a nice bridge to the next slide. So how do you prioritize? Because there are a lot of opportunities. So how do you begin?
Yeah, so this is great. We have a lot of different capabilities, and what this is getting at is what those capabilities are. To directly answer your question, where do you begin? You begin with your most important improvement. So if you look at your home and you say, I've got a list of my improvement projects, but the roof is leaking, the roof gets priority because you need to stay dry, right? It'll cause a lot more damage if you don't fix the roof. So, well, you may want a kitchen upgrade. The roof takes priority. Same thing in your supply chain, right? You look at your key performance indicators. You look at things that are trending the wrong direction, and you align the digital twin to that most compelling area of your supply chain. And then over a period, this can even be over a period of years, you then start to operationalize those use cases that aren't as priority, but are really important to your business, that help you maintain that relevancy and place in the market you have with your customers. Because supply chain is really, when it comes to competitive advantage in the marketplace, a lot of it boils down to your supply chain, how responsive and efficient you can deliver. So from network strategy, we talked about logistics, from freight size, fleet sizing rather, to freight consolidations. I think we touched on production optimization and capacity planning across multiple facilities, and then I think everyone's familiar with inventory planning and multi-echelon inventory optimization, and where to put inventory surgically and which products, and what are the implications of those stocking levels. So and then tying that in with smarter sourcing. And one of the nice things, and I'll leave at this point, and then we can continue. When you look at Koopa and LlamaSoft coming together, when you're designing a network and you're looking at changes in the market, and you're trying to put items closer to customers, now all of a sudden your flow paths may change. So now you have new lanes that you're opening up for transportation. We send that with standard integration to our Koopa supply strategic sourcing engine, and then we run a sourcing event with those lanes and with those volumes out to the market, and we do an algorithmic analysis of that bid. We can award the business to our transportation service providers in conjunction with making these moves. So you have the ability to make these moves in a digital supply chain twin, and then instantly understand what those future volumes are and bid those lanes out, and have your contracted freight lanes in place as you're making these physical changes. And that's part of that closed loop planning and execution and sourcing that we get into between the two applications with Koopa and LlamaSoft coming together.
I know, and then I'll wrap it up on this slide. The demand predictions. You have a trend cloud with 500,000 data series like Texas and weather. So also on the demand side, you will have also long-term scenarios to build and to run in the near future. For time's sake, then we go to one part. Here it explains how you can expand it rapidly in a SaaS platform, and this explains itself. But for time's sake, I want to address this, because what is the value delivered? Because I have an interesting question related to this. So, what is the value of using all this kind of digital twin applications, Matt?
Yeah, and we started off with $16 billion, which is a big, amazing number, but it really helps to break that down into what does that break down into. So we see of the buckets that companies are measured primarily to buckets like increasing revenue, cost avoidance, sourcing saving costs, inventory costs, and the list goes on. When we surveyed all these customers, they came back with about an average savings across these indices of 10%. And depending on the maturing model and depending how inefficient or non-relevant their supply chain was, you see some of these metrics. One of these customers came back with like a 37% savings in transportation costs. And you see some customers come back with, a 4% increase, which on hundreds of millions of dollars of spend could be significant and tangible. But when you look at this, we start off with the premise that of the axes or of the supply chain cost centers that you're looking to impact, we're seeing an average 10% cost reductions and 10% savings across all of these areas, which is substantial. I imagine anyone listening to this, if they could take out 10% to inventory costs, sourcing costs, transportation costs, operating costs, it's like, sign me up. Let's go after that 10% reduction, because it can be hundreds of millions of dollars.
So, it's a myth that this kind of software should cost 100 million euro, of €1 million. So, the question from the audience is, how many companies can afford it? So, what is it cost to start with this kind of application, Matt?
Yeah, that's a great question. And typically our market is, companies over $1 billion and greater in annual revenue. In the food and logistics area, we go down to, like, 500 million. So yeah, you have to have some critical mass and has a complexity to need it. But when it comes to rolling it out, you don't have to spend $1 million, right? We'll operationalize customers in their, key critical use case for a couple €100,000, right? So it really depends on the scope and if you're trying to boil the ocean or not. So the nice thing is you can start with a pilot project. You can start with a very contained problem, put a minimal investment into the platform, and then see the value you get out of it, and then the business cases start to roll in with return on investment. So can you spend $1 million to start? Sure. We're not going to prevent you from scoping a project and spending $1 million with us. Do you have to? Absolutely not. So that's a myth. You can get into this for, hundreds of thousands of dollars or euros, and start to operationalize use cases and get tremendous value, and then, go from there. And we help customers do that. So great question, great question from the audience of how many companies can afford this. We haven't seen a company that needed it who couldn't afford it. It's more importantly is when the CFO is handing out money for capital, projects or things like this, is can you make the business case strong enough where this is an area where the CFO says, yeah, we're going to invest in this. So that's when the use cases become critical, when the value assessment that we do becomes critical. So again, we can put data and numbers in front of a financial person. They say, yeah, this is something we're going to invest in because we see the ROI.
And one thing,
Yep.
if I can just add, Martin, on the question and on the answer of Matt, I agree 100%. But also, I think you don't just buy your digital twin capability. I mean, it's not a matter of just buying it. I think we talked about it previously already. It's something you build up. The capability, the complexity of your model, the detail in which your digital twin can optimize, and that type of stuff. And it always starts with pilot projects and proving value to people in the organization. So in that sense, it starts with pilot projects, talking to people who can help you implement that and who can prove the value on that. And then you build along the way, and there your capability depend on software, but also on people. So in that sense, it's true. You need some resources, and there's some money in it to start building. But then there is also a practice in delivering that value.
Yeah, and I think you are better in chess if you have some simulation power. So wrapping up, there is a maturity model for continuous design. It's also in the ebook. That's a great news. You can download it. So we'll get to that later. Matt, don't get me wrong, it's very interesting, but you can read it. It's very fast to adapt. And we should have a Q&A, but we are questioning each other already. So if you want to join the conversation afterwards, so I would suggest please join us in the lounge. So right after this, when I will pause this webinar, we'll be in this lounge and we will be sitting at table 1. So I would suggest to get this conversation further in the lounge right after this. With that, I would like to say thank you to Miguel and Matt. Miguel, thank you very much for your cases.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
And Matt, thank you for your explanation, and also with the cases and to debunk some myths about the digital twin.
Yeah, appreciate having me on.
All right. So we'll have the link to the ebook. It's there in the PDF. I will make sure of it. So everybody, thank you for listening. So it will be recorded and made available for YouTube, and there will be an article about all this, and we will be in the lounge right after this. So thank you for now, and I hope to see you in the lounge. If not, maybe I will see you next Wednesday, the next webinar. Thank you, and I hope to see you in the lounge right after this. Thank you.